Hi, I'm Mike Naughton, and this is Hey Dan. It's a series of conversations with Dan O'Neill. Dan O'Neill, who's sitting here, is running for the 104th seat in the Michigan State House race here in 2018. And Dan, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Mike.
Good. Thanks for taking the time to be here.
Oh, thanks for asking me.
Sure. You and I are both lawyers,
We are.
and something that really strikes me about what you talk about with people is the working man and who the working man is. Can you tell me a bit about that? Why is that something that you really attach yourself to with this campaign and who you are as a person?
Well, I think it stems from the kind of law that I do. So, all my life, I've represented individuals against either the government or corporations and insurance companies. And the reason I do that is because I have this perception of the world, and I think it's pretty accurate, and my practice has borne it out, that working people get the short end of the power stick in our system. And I've always been committed to doing what I can to try and rebalance that. Employment law is a great example. I represent women who have been discriminated at work because my sense is that women don't get treated fairly at work. I represent disabled people in employment settings because disabled people don't get treated fairly at work. Older workers don't get treated fairly at work. I've seen it all through my career. I see it almost everywhere I go. So it makes sense to me to bring those cases in court and try and fix that.
What about you as a person? Where'd you come from? What was your upbringing?
So I grew up here in Traverse City. There were 6 kids in our family. My dad worked at Montgomery Ward's. He sold furniture and floor covering. Never made a lot of money. We didn't know it as kids, right? But there were lots of times TV broke, right? It was going to be 3-4 months before it got fixed. I remember one time when the car broke down, right? We went maybe a year without a car. I always thought my dad was just, right, too lazy to get it fixed. But as I look back on it now, I know he couldn't afford to get it fixed. And so I wouldn't say that it was a struggle when I grew up. But we certainly knew what our limitations were. We weren't vacationing in Florida, and I remember a couple of summers that all of us shared one bike,
Shared a bike.
we shared a bike for a summer.
Man.
But this wasn't just any bike. It was a red Stingray with a white banana seat, and you really treasured your 45 minutes with the bike.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
you had to have it. Yeah. So so that experience, I think, informs what I do. And in addition to that, things are different now than they were then. I went to college. My brother and all my sisters went to college because we went at what I describe as the golden age of college education. There was a federal program called Basic Educational Opportunity Grants. And they, along with a really small, low-interest student loan, funded my entire college education. My parents could have never afforded to send any one of us, much less all 6 of us, to college. But all 6 of us got a college education. And so, to me, there's nothing unusual about community reaching out and helping people who need it to try and help them make their lives better. And it worked for our family. And I think, we don't do it as much now as we need to, because it'll work for other families too.
You touched on a couple of things that are really important to me. Traverse City, and I'd love to know where do you see it going, how has it changed, and education in a rural community like ours. You grew up here, I didn't, I came from downstate, and always had the benefit of this really beautiful community, but I never really knew the nuances of it like you did growing up here. What's it like growing up as a kid in Traverse City? What were some of your experiences?
Well, I think Traverse City is different now in a lot of ways than it was when I grew up. In a lot of ways, it's better than it was when I grew up. People tend to be really nostalgic about old Traverse City, and there's reasons to be. But there's opportunities here now that there weren't before. But it was a great place for me to grow up. And for a little different reasons, but a lot of the same ones. It was a terrific place for my kids to grow up, because the essential things that made it great when I was a kid are still here. We still have a clean bay to swim in and to look at and to walk by. It still has that small town feel, although it's much bigger than when I grew up. And I always say about this town when I'm describing it to my friends downstate that it has grown, there are a lot more opportunities, but when something important is happening here, eventually someone comes and asks for your 2 cents. And that's still true. And I think that's what kind of makes it a small town. We all feel like we still have our say in this community and the way that it grows and the direction that it takes. I think another thing that makes it special is that very few people just end up here. People decide to live here, whether you were born here and decided to stay or you decided to move here from somewhere else. And there's typically a sacrifice to be made for that, whether it's paying more for housing or earning less at your job. And when people make a sacrifice associated with a choice, they feel some ownership. And I sense that in the community. People feel an ownership of this place. And when you own something, you also feel a need to take care of it and protect it. And so I think that this community has that sense of ownership and that desire to protect what's here and keep it special, keep the reasons what brought them here, and to pass that on to their kids. And I think that makes it special too.
And you talk about this with some of the trade-offs of being here. And one of the monikers you hear outside of Traverse City is View the Bay, Half the Pay. And we talked about working people and some of the jobs that are here, but some of the job scarcity and how hard it is to get people to work here because we have jobs that aren't filled. How do you see your role in that and going to Lansing to help get rid of View the Bay, Half the Pay, make sure working people get a fair wage and have real opportunities here in Traverse City like there are across the state?
I think there are a number of things that you do. One is to try and promote the sort of businesses that provide high-paying jobs, and that's really important. And that's gonna help some folks in the community, but it's those sorts of programs miss a lot of people. And I think that for me, the answer to that question is that you invest as much as you can in the things that we know work. We know that starting education for kids at a young age provides better outcomes. They do better in school. They're more likely to go to college. And when they go to college, they're more likely to get better jobs with higher incomes. Supporting people's health care, right? Making sure that people can live a healthy lifestyle and don't have to be terrified that if they or their kids get sick, they're going to go bankrupt. I think if you provide people with those kinds of supports, they are far more likely to take risks, right? And start businesses and become entrepreneurs. And those are the kind of businesses that provide higher wages. And higher wages is part of the issue, but for most folks, they'd like to earn more money, but they'd also just like not to be scared all the time about money too. And you can help that by providing more support for childcare, for example. The number of folks in this county who can't afford childcare or can't find affordable childcare is growing all the time, and that's something that we can fix. So I think you provide supports for people, number one, and two, you provide supports for businesses that want to come here by paying jobs. I think one of the mistakes that the government makes all the time is that they think that they know more about how to run people's businesses than they do, and I don't believe that. I think that the government needs to provide support when it can, help when it can, and then stay out of the way. Now, I expect businesses, I think everybody in this community expects businesses to be responsible citizens and neighbors. And I have no problem with laying down basic rules about how you treat your workers and how you treat the environment in this corner of the state. But other than that, I think you ought to get out of the way and let them do what they do.
That's a good point, but getting out of the way. Something that I'm interested in too with your background here in town is you have insight into rural Michigan that a lot of legislators don't have because they come from downstate and elsewhere. How can you translate your experiences in Traverse City, being a small business owner, being a kid that grew up here and having a family here? How do you translate that to Lansing to argue on behalf of all of Grand Traverse County to say resources needed to be diverted here and here's why?
Well, there are a lot of great things happening in Grand Traverse County, and they're happening around the state as well. But sometimes new ideas and new ways of doing things take a while to catch on. And you talked about agriculture. I think about farming here. It's changed significantly since I was a kid. There was this. It seemed like the tendency when I was younger was for farms to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and farmers felt really successful the bigger they got, and if they were able to secure contracts from these big food companies. The trend seems to be going in the opposite way now, and that there's a lot of successful farmers that are determined to stay small and manageable and control the quality of their product. And fortunately, there's also a demand for that kind of farming and those kinds of products. So when people say farming, I think food, right? And what are we doing with food? And there's just a lot of great things going on. Groundwork has this great program getting locally grown food into schools. And if I remember correctly, it's 10 cents a meal or something now. And they're really proud of that, and they should be. 10 cents out of every meal that gets served to a school kid comes from locally grown produce or a local farm. But I think 10 cents a meal, right? Why aren't kids in Traverse City eating most of the food at lunch from farms around here?
Sure.
We have a great food production system here. It's good food, it's healthy, it's better for the kids. Studies show time and time again, the better the food that kids get, the better they do in school, right? Nutrition is a big piece of education. So while we're making some progress, there's a lot of work to be done, and I think the state can play a role in that.
There's a big movement with that in the state towards local control, and how the legislature seems to be very interested in one sense in giving local control to communities, but also taking it away. Where do you stand on that? Do you think that our state should be Lansing-centric, or that government should start at the location, Grand Traverse County, for example, and dictate what it needs to Lansing to get those resources and bring them back?
Mike, it depends on the issue. I think there are some things that it's very appropriate to control at the state level, because you need a reliable set of rules that apply equally to everybody around the state. But there are all sorts of laws that have been passed, particularly recently, on issues that I think that local communities should maintain control. The legislature passed a law that makes it illegal for communities to pass any laws regarding working conditions in your community, whether it's family leave or living wage or discrimination ordinances. I think that's wrong. I think communities should have a right to come together and decide what the rules are going to be in their community on those sorts of issues. There was a proposal, a law to prohibit communities from prohibiting the use of or charging any fee for plastic bags. Clearly a favor to some company that sells plastic bags, but it doesn't help our community at all. I think if Traverse City decides that they want to pass an ordinance that says we're not going to use plastic bags, which are terrible for the environment, by the way, why shouldn't we? And harm anybody else? And there was also a law that my opponent, Mary Inman, voted for to prohibit the state from passing any environmental regulation which is more strict than federal environmental regulations. Yeah, I can't think of a worse idea, quite frankly, than turning over the care of the Great Lakes to Scott Pruitt and the current EPA in Washington. We live here. We understand our environment. We understand the threats to our environment, and we ought to have the ability to regulate those threats. So yeah, I think loss of local control, it suits special interest in Lansing. It's not a good thing for the state. It's not a good thing for our community.
I want to explore this idea a little bit. There's a lot of people on the right that feel very strongly that the federal government can't get it right, and that states' rights should be supreme. Is this an inconsistent position for him to take, Inman or anyone else really in Lansing, to say that we can't go above and beyond what they're doing in Congress? To me, it seems like it's saying the states are not smarter than the federal government. Federal government should just be this simple baseline on things like the environment. Why is that dangerous for your opponent, for example, to cede that control to D.C. as opposed to here in Michigan?
Well, I mean, in reality, what it is a lobbying profit bill, right? And so instead of having to, these laws are being proposed in states across the country. And if they're passed, and I'm a large petrochemical company, all I need to do then is lobby in Washington, because those rules are going to apply to every state in the country, and I don't have to bother with lobbying the state legislatures in order to get the same laws that I want passed. But the fact of the matter is that every region of the country is different, states are different, the environmental threats are different, and they need to be evaluated separately. And when we as citizens see a threat to the environment, we shouldn't have to go to Washington to get it resolved. We ought to be able to go to Lansing and get it resolved, because I think that's our right as citizens.
So we've talked about Traverse City.
Yep.
Why would someone in Grand trust someone in Traverse City? Because Traverse City is kind of polarizing. There's the county and then there's the city. So what attributes do you have being in Traverse City that really speak to people in Grand, Acme, East Bay, really the rest of the county, which is the third fastest growing county in our state in terms of population growth?
Yeah. The answer is there's just no reason for someone in Grand to trust a guy from Traverse City. If I lived in Grand, I wouldn't either. And when I talk about why I want to do this, and when I talk to people about giving me a chance to do this and promising that I'm going to go to Lansing and fight for them, it's got nothing to do with the fact that I'm from Traverse City. I don't think that qualifies me to do anything. What I think qualifies me to do this is that I care about these issues. And I think that this system could be fairer to people. I think that everybody's entitled to an equal opportunity, and I don't think they're getting it. And so what I'm telling people and trying to convince people of is that I believe that to my core, and that I will fight every day to try and bring that about, because I don't think it's happening now, and it has to. And I also think that not enough people participate in this process. And one of the reasons that they don't is because they have this sense that it's not fair, and that people with more money have more say in the government than they do. And the fact is that they're right. And I believe that that's wrong too. And I'm going to fight to change that when I go to Lansing. And it's those beliefs and my passion for fighting to change those things that I think qualify me to run. And that's why I think folks in Grand will consider voting for me, not because I'm from Traverse City.
Dan, I want to talk about passion. A lot of people do a lot of different jobs, but it's different when you see someone working from passion. What does passion mean to you? How do you communicate your passion? And how does that translate into what this is about for you? Are you passionate about this?
I am passionate about this. To me, passion comes in a couple different forms, but the one that's most familiar to me is doing something because you believe that it needs to be done, that it's important to do the work, and you focus more on doing the work than on the result that you get at the end, because you believe that just in doing the work there's value in that. This campaign is a great example of that, because whether you get elected or not, this campaign is about going out and talking to people and telling them what you think the problems are, and with the basic solution of we can do this better if we work hard at it. And so no matter what happens at the end of the campaign, if you've talked to 1,000 of your neighbors and they believe just a little bit more than they did before, that things can be different, and that if they're willing to join in the fight, they can make change, you've accomplished a lot. And that's what I'm passionate about. What I'm passionate about is community coming together and working together. I'm less concerned with the solutions we come up with, because I'm just absolutely convinced most people are good-hearted, good-natured, they care about each other, and they care about their communities. And when you get them all together to work on something, you get good results.
Sure.
Yeah.
We're here today at Earth and Ales by the Commons.
Mm-hmm.
These are two really great stories. Earth and Ales is a small business that came up here, and they've got a beautiful facility. The Minervinis with the Commons have taken something and renovated it into something I think is absolutely special. I want to talk about that in terms of the Traverse City story and what you see for your vision of the area when you're in Lansing. How do you help businesses come here and really do special things like these places are?
Well, first of all, I agree. It was my first time here. It was great beer,
right? I love the beer. Yeah,
you went with what?
Sweetbriar every time.
Sweetbriar.
I always do the wheat beer. It's excellent.
Do you?
I do.
See, I went with the IPA.
And how'd they do?
It's excellent.
Good.
It's excellent. I tend to go for the IPAs.
I'm not an IPA guy.
They're too heavy for you?
Yeah,
that's
a little
problem?
tangy.
Yeah.
The Sweetbriar, it's got that nice mellow strawberry thing. It's excellent.
You can get the little citrus notes in an IPA now. It's
true.
You get almost anything you want in an IPA these days.
Yeah.
So you asked about the Commons, which is a great story.
Yeah.
So when I grew up, this place was still a working state hospital, and it closed sometime in the 70s, early 80s, and it changed the town a lot. Lots of folks I knew when I grew up worked at the state hospital. They used to wear a uniform, right? They wore white shirt and pants. And whether you were an orderly or worked at the cafeteria or maintenance, they all had that uniform. And you'd see people downtown. You always knew who worked here. We had two neighbors on our block that worked at the state hospital. So it was a big employer. And so when it closed, there was some hardship in town. A lot of folks lost their job. And as an idyllic place as it is now, my memories of it as a kid are not like that, because there was a lot of people here who suffered a lot. It was people from across the region, right? This was the hospital where they treated mental illness across the region. So there were a lot of families who had members with mental illness, and a lot of people with severe mental illness were here. So when it closed, it did what most facilities like this do. It just slowly sort of started to crumble. But you look around, it's such a beautiful site that there were a few folks in town who were just absolutely determined to turn it into something different. And they were here. They were here with the bulldozers. They were ready to take this place down. And a woman, Carol Hale, in town had put together a group, and they stopped it. And they bought it for $1 from the state, because the state wanted it off the books. And they set about figuring out what to do with it. And I happened to be on a planning commission at that time. And there were a couple of different proposals. And we went through long planning processes with a group of investors out of Chicago and another group of investors out of New Jersey, I think. Pretty slick sort of real estate developers who just couldn't make it work. And that process took years. And while that process went on, the place continued to crumble. And I worried about this place, because it has, I don't know if you know it or not, but the acreage of the Commons is almost the exact same percentage of Traverse City that Central Park represents to the city of New York.
No way.
Yeah, true. Little
That's
known
cool,
fact.
yeah.
True. So if this, right, if you picture the growth of the city,
Sure.
if we don't get this piece right, it's going to have an impact.
Sure.
And if we get it right, it's going to have a huge impact. So we were all very, very worried that we weren't going to find a way to redevelop this. And it's continuing to deteriorate. And I remember the night that Ray Minervini in his pickup truck and his blue jeans comes into the Planning Commission and says, I don't know what's going to happen up there. And I don't know how we're going to do this, but rain is pouring through the roof on Building 50. Let's just put a roof on that. We're going to start with that, and then we'll see where this goes. And we said, if you think you can do that, that sounds great to us. We'll give you some development rights, right? So that you'll have some control over where it goes from there. And Ray started to work. And it has been fits and starts. But every time I come to a festival on the lawn, and I run into Ray, and we hug each other, and both say, look at this community. Look what happened here. Isn't this just exactly what we thought? And I can tell you that neither of us probably thought that this is what it was going to become. We were both scared to death, but we both say, yeah, this is exactly what we thought it was going to become. It's a great story. It's a great Traverse City story. I'm really proud of him, and I'm proud of the community, and I'm really proud of this place.
Traverse City recently was named the strongest town in America. Cool thing, I know, right?
Yeah.
But we didn't get there overnight. It was built on planning years ago. And you were on the Planning Commission. And you had a vision for what you thought Traverse City would be. And it wasn't strip malls. Talk to me about that vision and what you see today in Traverse City.
Well, you're right. Planning is a really important thing. In terms of planning has been a really important thing in creating the city that we have today. But there's also been a good deal of luck that we've had. The Commons and Ray Minervini are a good example of that. And not so much the Planning Commission and the Planning Department and the City Commission, but just some passionate people in the city who had an idea for what it could be and just kept that kind of pressure on all the time. Because there have been lots of times in this city where we could have taken what I always consider to be the easier path. When I was on the Planning Commission, we battled all the time about the width of the streets and the width of the intersections, right? And sidewalks, how easy it was to get across the street or ride your bike across town. And there were lots of people that thought that was just nonsense. That the only question we should be asking is, how long does it take me to drive across town? And that we should widen 8th Street to 4 or 5 lanes, right? And we should widen every street that literally, if you had to touch your brakes on a street somewhere in town, we ought to add a couple lanes to it. That was the concept.
Sure.
And you laugh, but it's true. And it took significant will by people to prevent that from happening. And we fought it literally one intersection at a time. And our current city planner, Russ Soering, I learned a ton of planning from him. He's been a great leader on these issues. And he taught me about how, the question isn't how long it takes to drive down the street. The question that will produce the kind of town that we want is, how long does it take to cross the street if I'm walking? That's the critical measurement that we have to make. And we have a plan. Cities always had a plan. Some of them were more forward-looking than others. You go back and look at some of the plans in the 70s, and you'd shudder at some of the things that how they thought this town was going to look. I mean, there was a time when we had adopted this plan that was very suburban-looking, where buildings had to be set back from the street, and you had to put a parking lot in front of it. Now, again, we're talking about luck, right? So where Little Fleet sits today used to be a place called Jack's Party Store. It's a great store. We used to go in there all the time. And it was just a little small town party store that sold newspapers, candy, and booze. And it burned. And when it burned, our zoning ordinance at the time, which was a suburban zoning ordinance, wouldn't allow them to rebuild it on the street. So they had to push the building back, and they rebuilt it, and they were required to put that parking lot in front of it. And if you remember, it didn't work very well for Jack's. It never fit on that street. It wasn't a comfortable place to walk to because you had to walk through the parking lot. And again, in a bit of luck, it works great for Little Flea, right? Which is a great example of this town. You take a terrible mistake by the planning department, right? And you take some smart people who know how to serve beer and bring in food trucks, and boom, you got a great hot spot. And the other thing about planning is that the Commons is another great example in that we didn't know what it would become. I assure you, Ray Minervini didn't know what it would become. But the way that it came together created what it is. This could be a Walmart. Believe me, this could be almost anything.
Sure.
But because of the way that it came together in small little pieces, you got businesses, right, that could get a start here, like Higher Grounds and Left Foot Charlie's, and the businesses that are in the Mercado that could get reasonable space, right, reasonably priced space to do things that really aren't all that traditional. It was really tough for them to find a spot downtown, but here was a place that they could come, start their business, figure it out, which they did, and now they're among the most successful businesses in town. So it takes a little planning, but it also takes a lot of luck. Just talk about it.
So something that I think is really cool about what you've done is you went downstate, you started a career, you came up here, and you changed your hometown to be something different. And today, Traverse City is different than it was when you first hit this town. I think that's really cool.
It when you look back on it, it's cool, and it's been, in all honesty, it's been pretty cool the whole while. My wife Maura was not as crazy about coming here as I was, largely because her family's all in the Detroit area, my family's all here. And if you know Maura, you also know she's a terrifically talented lawyer.
Sure.
And she had begun a practice down there that in Detroit, doing sort of the same thing she does now, working. Some people call it poverty law, but she worked for Michigan Legal Services in helping people, providing legal services to people who are being evicted, helping them get benefits that they needed for their family. And she really enjoyed that and was in that community. But you know, there's no question that this is a special place. There aren't.
Are you glad you came back?
I'm really glad I came back. I'm really glad that we raised our family here. I walk to work most days. That's an opportunity that most people don't get. But you did the same thing. And what do you think? You were in Detroit.
Yeah.
Now you're here. Although
yeah.
For me, it's coming home.
Right. It's different for me. I'm trying to create a home here, and it can be scary. It's a tough place.
What is scary about Traverse City?
For me, it's economic development. You know, I'm a big economic development guy, and I need more people and more businesses here for my business to do better. And so when I'm in Detroit, I've got access to lots of business. In Traverse City, you got to work it, and you got to go downstate sometimes. At least I do, like starting off.
You're a lawyer. There's lots of lawyers here.
Whoa.
Yeah, and that's but you know, and that's always been true.
Sure.
It's been true throughout my career. Although, and you said earlier, right? View of the Bay is half the pay, and
I hate that. I want to kill them.
I know you do. I know you do.
Exists to destroy View of the Bay half the pay.
And I get that. But I think that there is a compromise to be made to live in a place like this.
This is true.
Right? Because people recognize how special it is, and so there's going to be more people that want to do what you do, and they want to live here, and that creates competition, and that can make it tougher.
That's right.
to make a living.
You're right.
And so for me, I've always thought you and I could make more money going downstate and doing what we do.
Yeah.
True?
True.
But yet here you and I are here.
Right.
Right? and it's not just you and me, right? It's true for everybody, just about everybody in this town.
All the doctors, all the dentists, all the lawyers.
And guys, and the contractors and the plumbers and the electricians, right? There's more money to be made other places, but I think we all do the same thing. We balance off the value that we get from this place, from days like today when you look outside and sitting in places like this, like the Grand Traverse Commons, and swimming in the bay, and fishing in the Boardman, and those things you can't put a price on. Right, those things that adds value to your life and your family's life. That just never shows up on the bottom line, but it certainly, right, it makes your life different and better.
And that explains a lot why you're a stalwart for the environment up here. You've always fought on that one, which is really great. Line 5, you're very involved in that.
So that water, right, is there's two things about it. One is, if you're from here, that water is part of who you are. It just feels like it. It feels like part of you, and you can't help but feel like you need to protect it. 2, it's why everybody's here. Right? It's the one thing that we all have in common and we all agree on is how much we love the Great Lakes. And I think it's astonishing that we have a state representative from Grand Traverse County who gets a failing grade from the League of Conservation Voters. How is that possible? The state representative from Grand Traverse County ought to be the leading voice on the environment in the state, because we understand it and we value it, and we value it so much that we make sacrifices to live next to it. So I agree with you that there are prices to be paid for being here, but what you get back, right, is so much more valuable. It may not make as much money, but boy, the life we lead has way more value.
Well, thanks for watching. This is Hey Dan, and if you like it, hit subscribe. It's that nice big rectangle right there. Hit the thumbs up if you like it. Share it with your friends. Go to voteo'Neill.com, and there's going to be more of these coming up. If you got ideas, suggestions, questions, whatever, hit us up in the comments, but we look forward to doing more of these in the future. So thanks so much for tuning in. All right. Fair enough?
Nice job, my friend.
Hey, it's all you, dude. Are you kidding me? This is like throwing softballs at Jose Canseco. I'm just trying to get out of the way. Good God.
We haven't been able to talk about sports. When are we going to talk about sports, Mike? I mean, come on. I mean,
Man, that one was... I got some goosebumps on that answer.